Greetings, friends. I hope you are all doing well. My name is Omar Harami, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us for the latest Kumi Now online gathering, as we look at the wide range of discriminatory policies used by Israel to fragment the Palestinian people. Before we start, I'd like to remind you that this session is being broadcasted live on Facebook. If you do not wish to appear, please turn off your video feed. We would love also if you could quickly share the Facebook post on Facebook so that others may join. The link will be shared by our friends in the chat. I'd also like to let you know that in the coming weeks, we would like to carve out time at the end of the meeting for one or more people from the audience to tell us how they are applying Kumi Now back in their own communities or are otherwise advocating for Palestine. The idea is to share ideas and inspiration for others and celebrate accomplishments. If you would like to speak for up to 5 minutes in a future meeting, please do email us at kumi@kuminow.com. It is the main email that we use for the Kumi team. We're also going to introduce polling questions into some of our gatherings. Right now, we'd like to answer 2 questions about your activism. Mark, could you launch the poll? Or I think you have already done it. We hope that you will find the poll is at the bottom of your screen. It would say poll, and if you click on it, you will have access to the questions. We hope that you will find this session interesting and informative. I'd like to start by having everyone that you will be seeing today introduce themselves. So Denise, could you please introduce yourself? Denise, you are on, could you unmute yourself, please?
Okay. Sorry. Good evening for everybody. I am so happy to be with you for the 6th time. I am Denise Asad, a storyteller from Haifa. I am living in Haifa with my family, 2 young lady and 2 grandchild, a girl and a boy.
Thank you very much, Denise. It has been a great pleasure having you with us in the past week.
Thank you.
And I would like to introduce our main speaker and only speaker for today. We are very lucky to have him, Mr. Daoud.
Hi, my name is Daoud Kuttab. I'm a journalist and media entrepreneur. I'm from Jerusalem, currently living in Amman, running a local radio station and writing a lot on Palestine issues. I write for Al Monitor, a Washington-based website, news website, very serious, very analytical if you're interested in analysis. I also write for the Arab News, so the English language newspaper, and every now and then I write in other places, including sometimes the Washington Post and other places. So that's basically what I am. I've taught at Princeton University journalism, and I received a few awards, and I was fortunate or unfortunate of being arrested by both the Israelis and the Palestinians, which was a kind of a good thing for my awards. Other than that, I'm happy to discuss. I'm a fanatic about Jerusalem issues, so I write a lot and I talk a lot about Jerusalem issues. And the general Palestinian attitudes and analysis of the current affairs. I'm not sure exactly what topics Omar wants me to talk about, but I'm happy to talk about anything and answer your question.
Thank you very much, Daoud. As it has been the tradition, we will be moving on and we will be updating you very fast on realities on the ground, major things that have happened that are happening in Palestine and Israel. So give me a second to share the screen. for many of you, our friends, you are receiving the Sabil Wave of Prayer. If you're not on the email list, please do join the Sabil Wave of Prayer. We will provide you with major things that are happening per week and with prayer requests. As Daoud has mentioned, the region is expecting snow. It's not a huge snowstorm, but it is. It's expecting for snow to remain on the ground for at least maybe half a day or maybe a full day. The children are very excited. The people are very excited. It happens once every 4 or 5 years, so we're really looking forward. But we're also remembering and holding refugees, especially Syrian refugees, in our prayers, who have already been very much suffering with cold weather, and also for all of the people who have been displaced. Israel announced for the first time 2 days ago that they are planning to give 5,000 doses for coronavirus vaccine to Palestinians, specifically for Palestinian medical workers who are on the front line. So that's the first time Israel is moving into being more inclusive with providing vaccines and taking up a small part of their role as an occupying power. But also, Israel has stopped and turned back 2,000 vaccines that were originally destined to go to Gaza. So they turned them, the PA was able to get a number of vaccines from the Russian vaccine and sent 2,000 for the medical teams in Gaza, but Israel refused to have the vaccines enter Gaza. So in one way, I mean, there is, it's a bit ironic. In the media, they say that they want to give Palestinian doctors in the West Bank vaccines. However, they're denying the entry of vaccines into Gaza. A very well-known and respectable Palestinian poet, Murad Barghouti, passed away in Amman on Sunday. He spent most of his life in exile. He's very much, he's one of his most famous novels is I Saw Ramallah. I think Ryan will be sharing a link of it online. If you haven't read it, we encourage you to read it. He also has a very famous young son, who's also a very young poet who's been engaged in competitions and has many publications out there. The Israeli District Court in Jerusalem rejected an appeal by 4 Palestinian families living in the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah in occupied East Jerusalem, although these families have been receiving lots of solidarity from around the world, and upheld the eviction order in favor of the Jewish settlers. The district court refused to allow discussion of ownership of the land despite attempts by the lawyers to prove the settlers do not own the land on which the housing project was built in 1956 by the Jordanian government over 10 years before the Israeli occupation of East Jerusalem. A friend of mine and somebody who is very much well known in the Ramallah area, his name is Bilal Ajouli. He owns a children's toys shop. He's 53 years of old, or was 53 years of old. This is his picture a few minutes before he was rammed by a settler car.
Wow.
Investigation is taking place. He was part of the 25 people who are doing a hiking trip in the northern part of the Jordan Valley. A speeding car driven by an Israeli settler hit 5 people, injuring 2 seriously and killing Bilal Ajouli. He was a wonderful person who was really a community leader who cared a lot for young people, especially during the second Intifada, while he was arranging activities as volleyball and so on. So I would ask you to remember him in his in your prayers and his family. two of the people who also got injured, the one who is behind him, Abu Shadi, is also a neighbor of mine. Today, this week, on February 20th, is the World Day for Social Justice. And this is why we're having this session. This session will explain about outlining the different challenges that Palestinians face, whether they are inside Israel or in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza Strip, people who reside in the different forms of discrimination that Palestinians face. I know it gets very complicated. It's a small piece of land, and our population is small compared to the US, UK, and other bigger countries. However, Israel has managed to divide us and fragment our community into different spaces with different challenges. And I hope Daoud Kuttab will be able to help you better understand the different set of challenges that we are facing as Palestinians, regardless of where we reside. This is the news update, and as it is tradition, we will move to Denise, who will be sharing a very short Palestinian story from our culture before we move to our main speaker, Daoud Kuttab.
I want to share with you my not problems, but with my English. I grew up, or I went to an Anglican school in Haifa, and since I was 3 years old, I went to the nursery, and we started to learn English. So I supposed to be very good in English talking, or I am reading very well. I can understand, I translate, but somehow I am not practicing so much my English. So meeting with you, telling you the stories, it was a good opportunity for me to practice my English. My young son is 30, and my daughter, she's 35. They helped me a lot. They helped me. This time I decided to be really not get any help. And I am very happy with this. And the funny thing that my grandchild, she's 3 years old. She, since she was small, she's speaking English. She's watching a lot, not a lot, but she have Peppa Pig. It's an English British videos for children. So she have the English is like her first language. So I have also to read for her. So I have it was really good for me to practice my English with her and with you. Today I will tell a story that I heard first time from a Lebanese storyteller called Jihad Darwish. He is living now in France for 40 years, and he's really quite very famous there, telling Oriental stories. And a story called The Storyteller. In a small town, there was a storyteller. He was good enough, not so brilliant, but good enough. People like to come every evening to the town square and giving him food or any bread, eggs, because he didn't deal with money. And they were happy, and a lot of people really enjoyed it. But days was over, years, and he didn't renew his stories. And people get boring from the same story, how much you can hear the same story. So every night, less and less people came to his performance. And in the end, there was nobody in the square to hear. He was alone there, and he felt very bad. And I can really understand him, because as a storyteller, I need audience. Stories can't be only for me. I need to share my stories, every storyteller. So he decided to leave the town and go search for another place to tell his stories. He told the people of this town, and they were very upset, but they understood him. They separate from him with a lot of love. They gave him a lot of things for his journey to help him pass his journey safely. And he had his stories, he had them in his heart. He had few clothes, so he didn't have so much things to carry. He went in his journey. And before that, he said, oh, how I will know where to go exactly. And he think for a while and said, okay, I will let my heart to lead me. My heart will really lead me to the place which will be my home. Okay, he went in his journey. He walked 1, 2, 3 days. He arrived to a small village and he saw a farmers working in their field. Salamu alaikum. No salam, we don't have time for talking. He knew that it's not his place. He continued walking. He walked and walked and walked. He reached another small town. It's like big village. And he saw several women, young and old women, coming up from the valley with jars full of water from the spring down. He said, hello, everybody. Masal khair. They were really upset. And one old woman said, oh, shame on you. How you are talking. You are a stranger. You're not allowed to talk to us. He really felt upset because he didn't mean anything really bad. But he continued his walk. He walked and walked and walked 1, 2, 3 days. He arrived to a field full of flowers, butterflies, and there was a young, small boy, not small boy, like 8, 9 years old. And when he saw him, say, hello, hello, uncle. In Arabic, we for every adults, we said ammo, which is uncle. Hello, ammo, hello. You look stranger. You are not from here. He said, yes, I am not from here. He said, come to us. My mother, not only my father also, welcome any stranger. And my mother prepared for today mujaddara, which is lentil with rice. It's a very traditional, tasty, healthy Palestinian food. And the storyteller asked him, you are sure your mother and your father welcome any stranger? He said, yes, yes, come with me. And when he arrived the house, the place, it was real. They was waiting for him, and he joined them for the lunch, and it was really tasty. And when he told them about his profession, that he is a storyteller and he need to really to practice it, they help him to find a small room and rent it, and went with him to the village square. And from the first evening, he started to tell his stories. And day after day, people came, more and more and more people came, and he lived really very fine. He enjoyed the care of the people, how they really love these stories. But what happened in his village or town happened again. People didn't like to hear the same stories again and again, and he didn't renew his stories, didn't search for new stories. So the audience began to left him day after day, less and less and less audience, until he was alone every night in the square telling his stories. One day, one evening, he was telling the stories, and somebody touched touch his clothes and pushed them like, and say, Ammo, Ammo, uncle. And he was really upset, but he saw that it was the young boy who met him in the first time and invited him to eat dinner with his family. And said, sorry, sorry, Ammo. What you want? He said, I have a question for you. You can ask. The boy asked him, why you keep telling your stories and there is no audience, nobody is hearing you? The storyteller told him, once I was telling my story in case to change the world. Today I am telling my story so that world will not change me and my soul. وحكايتي حكيتها وبقلوبكم خبيتها ويا ريت تحبوها زي ما أنا حبيتها. I told you my story, put it in your heart. And I hope that you will like it as I do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Denise.
And I hope that all what is happening with the discrimination, with the Israeli, with all the world, all the violence, will not change our souls. Hope, pray for it.
Thank you, Denise.
Welcome.
And now we will move to Daoud.
Thank you, Omar, and thank you for following me and listening to me. I hope I can help illuminate some of the issues for you. I want to start by thanking Americans for getting rid of the terrible president you had. I don't know if you know, but people were mesmerized in this part of the world with your elections. They followed it. Somebody said it, we had elections in November, and people followed the American elections much more than the Jordanian elections. So you can imagine how much people were really understanding that elections do make a difference, and understanding how bad the previous president was, especially on the Palestinian issue. It was normally people say there's no difference, you know, they're two sides of the same coin. But I think in this time there was a clear difference. Not to put any much hope in the Biden administration, I don't think it's going to do much in the positive sense, but at least we will not be in the negative side. So I just wanted to say that thank you. And I know that many of you have been committed supporters to the Palestinian cause. So I also want to thank you for that, and your commitment is like drops. You might not feel them having a difference, but in the long term, they make a lot of difference. So I just want to tip my hat to you and say thank you for everything you've done. I've been given the task of trying to demystify all the legal issues that have to do with issues of identity and nationality and rights and so on. You probably heard more, this is kind of a legal issue rather than a political one. So I will try to be talk as little on the legal issues and more on the politics. I don't know if you've heard my brother Jonathan speak, but he probably could answer you the legal issues. But I think if you really want to understand all the legal status, we kind of need to take a step backwards and begin in the early 1900s, when the issues, the Israeli-Palestinian issues, started to percolate up. And at that time, the Palestinian Arabs, both Christians and Muslims, were the overwhelming majority of the population, owned in 80 to 90% of the land. So the issue of, we were in the post-colonial era, you know, we had World War I, World War II, and there was a lot of expectations since before World War I that colonial powers would seek to allow the local communities to establish their own homeland. So Palestinian Arabs were fighting for their own national homeland. It so happened that Jews, immigrants, locals, Zionists, whatever, were also trying to find a homeland, and that's kind of how the process began. And at the time, until now, actually, there has only been two basic avenues for conflict resolution. You will hear, and we've been hearing thousands of ideas, but they really come down to two basic issues: whether there will be a sharing of the power or sharing of the land, whether the people would have equal rights in a single country, or there would be a division of the land, so there would be two different countries with two different legal systems. And for many years, especially after the PLO was established, this was the goal. Palestinians tried to emulate some of the Western democratic countries by saying, we want a secular democratic state. The Zionists said, you know, you're trying to destroy Israel, and this is not something that, and they succeeded in warping this this idea into becoming or appearing to be an idea that is aimed at eliminating the Jewish population or the state of Israel. It didn't help that some of our leaders were, their rhetoric was quite bad, and so that actually increased the tensions. And then you know, State of Israel was created in 1948. The Nakba happened. Then Palestinians kept on fighting to have the right of refugees to return, and then the occupation took place. And finally, Palestinians said, okay, you know, there's plenty of Jews now in our country, and they have no interest in sharing the power with us, so let us share the land. And therefore came this idea, which is until today the preeminent idea of the two-state solution, where you have a Palestinian state with the majority of the Palestinian population in the state of Israel, with some Palestinian citizens in Israel. And there was a question of what to do with settlers in the West Bank. There was a question of what to do with the right of return, but that was the basic contour of what later became the Oslo process and continues till this day. We heard Biden's team say, we are for the two-state solution. To be honest, nobody's genuine about the two-state solution. I just wrote a piece in Project Syndicate, and maybe somebody can look it up on Project Syndicate, saying to Europe, because basically we gave up on America, that if Europe really believes in two-state solution, they should recognize the state of Palestine. But the fact is that the idea of the two-state solution, a Palestinian state, is losing steam as Jerusalem, the issue of Jerusalem is becoming very complicated as more and more settlers, since Oslo Accords, the settler Jewish population has tripled. And so now there's some, especially the young people were saying, my own kids even saying, you know, you're wasting your time on the two-state solution. Let's just find a way of sharing the land, sharing the power with equal rights. Now, of course, you have to convince the other side, and that is a problem. So that's the political framework that we're in. Now, in the process, different legal issues have happened. First of all, Israel was declared the state in 1948. It was recognized by the world powers, and it has civil rights to most of its population. You know, there's different issues about discrimination and racism, but basically, Israeli citizens, whether Arab or Jews or non-religious, have citizenship rights. Then came the 1967 war, and that added to the complications because you had Israel Israel take over the West Bank, which was part of the Kingdom of Jordan. They took over the Gaza Strip, which was under Egyptian rule. And until now, those areas, according to international law, have been considered or are still considered occupied areas. Israel doesn't accept that terminology. They say these are administered areas that are under question and so on. But they did one thing that was kind of a legal move. They annexed East Jerusalem, that's where I'm from and Omar is from, and they made the Palestinians living there permanent residents, which is a kind of a funny explanation because they are not citizens of Israel, but they have the right to civilian benefits, social security benefits, schools, and so on, but they have no political rights. They can apply for a citizenship if they want, and for the most part, very few have done it. And those who have done it, some of them have been granted citizenship, but of the 350,000 Palestinians living in East Jerusalem, I don't know, 10, 12,000 have Israeli citizenship. And so, so that has created now three categories. First, Israeli citizens who live in the pre-67 state of Israel. Then you have Palestinians in the occupied areas, which after 1993, the Oslo Accords, they received kind of interim Palestinian passports approved by Israel. So it's a kind of a legal crazy idea of not being citizens of a state because Palestine is not a state, but not being part of Israel because Israel has not wanted to annex the West Bank. So if they annex the West Bank, then they would have to give citizenship, and that would tip the balance. Today, there's slightly more Palestinian Arabs than Israeli Jews in the area between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean. So you have Israeli citizens, you have Israeli residents, and if in the American context, a resident is like a green card holder. So those of us who live in East Jerusalem are considered residents, but not citizens. And as residents, as long as we live in Jerusalem, we're fine. But if we decide to, I don't know, travel and work somewhere else, and if we stay out of the country for 5 to 7 years, I don't know exactly the legal issue, you lose your rights. You become a tourist if you want to come. And so that is a complicated issue. And then you have the West Bank and Gaza, which after the 1993 Palestinian Declaration of Principles between the PLO and Israel, they were given Palestinian passports. But again, they're not citizens of any country. They're in limbo because they are awaiting what was supposed to be a 5-year interim period in which negotiations were supposed to settle the borders and the nationality, but that has not happened in 25 years or 28 years, I think now. So again, we're back to square one in that you have Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, you have Palestinians in East Jerusalem, and you have Palestinian citizens in Israel. You have Jewish Israeli citizens, and you have Jewish Israeli settlers living in the West Bank. So it's a hodgepodge. And so that's why more and more people are saying we should skip on the two-state solution and fight for a single country with equal rights to all the citizens or all the population. Now, unfortunately, it takes two to tango, and you can't force on one country whatever population or whatever legal structure they want. When Trump tried to meddle in our conflict, they tried a new idea, which is perfectly fitting with the Zionist approach. And the Zionist approach, it can be described in a very simple way. They would like the land without the people. And so wherever there was land with very few people, they were trying to annex it to Israel so that they can get as much land as possible with as few people as possible. And in a way, that's what they have done with Jerusalem, because they annexed Jerusalem, very important politically and so on, but they have not given a citizenship. Not that Palestinians wanted citizenship, but if there is a movement to get Palestinians and Israelis to agree on some type of equal civilian rule, then that could work. Now there is also new ideas of a confederation between the two countries, some type of a merger. But unfortunately, because of the balance of forces, Israel is powerful militarily, economically, and politically. You know, Palestinians basically cannot dictate or cannot insist on their rights, on the rights that the international community has agreed on. And so we are in that state, but in the meantime, people are living, trying to make ends meet. And as a result, we have a situation where Israel is able to gain the most out of what we call milking the occupied territories economically and politically, without having to pay the political price of what they're doing. One new feature that has become much more popular is the fact that since Israel has refused what I said earlier in the speech of either sharing the power or sharing the land, they refuse to, what we say, marry us or divorce us. They're, we're using us as concubines. I'm not going to use bad words here, but they have neither given us the privilege and the rights of marriage, and they have not given us the freedom of divorce. And so we are being, in a way, abused in this untenable, really, situation. And so we need to find a way to end this occupation, which is really the crux of the problem. Whether you end it in negotiations, whether you end it with the Israelis withdrawing, whether you end it in any way that they can, but it is an illegal occupation that is also a violation of the Geneva Conventions. But anyway, because it has taken so long, what we are experiencing now is more and more the war crime of apartheid. After South Africa, the South Africans and those that had solidarity with South Africa succeeded in creating international regulation and laws that declared apartheid as a war crime. And so if we can prove, and we can easily prove, that there's two legal systems in the West Bank, that there is a system for Israelis in which the settlers, they have civil rights, not military rule. They have freedom of movement. They can travel anywhere they want. They have all the social benefits of Israelis. Yet on the other hand, the Palestinians don't have any of those areas. So the Corona pandemic is a great example of, let's say, take the city of Hebron. There is, in the downtown of Hebron, there is 100,000 Palestinians, and there's about 5,000 Jewish settlers. All the Jewish settlers received the shots to the vaccine, and the Palestinians did not, because the Israelis, paid attention to their own. And so you have a situation here where your neighbor gets the vaccine because he's Israeli. Your neighbor can vote in the Israeli elections next month. They're going to vote for the people who decide who the next prime minister and who is the defense minister. And Palestinians who live next door cannot do that, but they have to accept, or they are under the power of the army that is directed by the prime minister and defense minister. So we have two separate legal systems in the same local population, which is the exact definition of apartheid. Now, the International Criminal Court is set now to start investigating the charges that Palestinians have said all along, that Israel has been carrying out an apartheid rule. And they're also, they will be investigating two other issues. One is the continuous war crime of moving citizens of the occupying country to the occupied country. After World War II, all the world power decided to create a system that was supposed to manage how countries under a prolonged occupation. And in that system, which is called the Fourth Geneva Convention, they agreed, or it was stipulated, that an occupying country is not allowed to bring its own citizens to live in the occupied areas. They're not allowed to put people in prison in the occupied areas. They're not allowed to bring artifacts from the occupied areas. They're not allowed to practice collective punishment. So the settlement enterprise is the biggest continuous war crime. Every day that there are Jewish settlers in the occupied territories, Israel is committing a war crime. And so this is one of the charges that have been laid on Israel. The second is the 2014 Israeli war on Gaza, and there's lots of documented proof that Israel practiced war crimes. And the key here is that for a country to have the war crime tribunal not investigate them, is they have to do their own serious investigation. And the Palestinians who became a state under the UN regulations in 2014 applied to be a member of the International Criminal Court, was awarded a membership, and therefore has the right to request ICC to investigate charges of war crimes. It took a long time because the Israelis were saying, you know, is the West Bank, Gaza occupied territories? No, it's not. It's administered, it's disputed areas. But finally, the international judges voted that the West Bank and Gaza is indeed occupied areas, and ICC has jurisdiction to investigate. And so now there will be an investigation, and once there is investigation, there will be charges, and if there's charges, those responsible will be held responsible, and Benjamin Netanyahu will not be able to come to many European capitals because he could be arrested upon arriving in those countries. I don't know when that will happen, whether he will be in his own prison or not by then, but that is the status of the ICC. But back to the topic of conversation, we have the populations of Israel, Palestine is made up primarily of Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs, but while Israeli Jews in the entire area, in Israel, in Jerusalem, and in the occupied West Bank, all are under a single civilian rule. They are under Israeli civilian rule. They're Israeli citizens with political and civil rights. Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza are divided into two groups. You have the East Jerusalemites who have Israeli residency but not citizenship, and you have the West Bank and Gaza Palestinians who have no Israeli residency or citizenship. Also, West Bank and Gaza are not able to easily travel between each other locations because the corridor that was supposed to be established between West Bank and Gaza, Israel has not honored since the Hamas took over Gaza, and therefore people in Gaza are stuck. They cannot come to the West Bank or Jerusalem or Israel. Sometimes Egyptians open the border, but that's another issue. So those are the issues, and I see that I have questions. Omar, do you want me to read the questions and answer them, or do you want people to say the questions?
I think I will be reading the questions for you when you are done.
Yeah, that's basically my talk. We will, develop some more in the question and answer period.
Thank you. But before we move into the questions, for people, you are for our dear participants, you can write your questions in the chat, and I would be reading them. Unfortunately, because of the time limitation, we will not be able to open the mics for people to be engaged with to ask the questions orally. But let's see how we move with the questions. We have many questions, and I would ask you please to try to be as short, as concise as possible. I know many of these questions need books to be answered. So the first question is, do you sense the Gaza residents considering a change from Hamas if the elections take place?
Yes, you're right. This would take a long time, but in brief, the split that has happened since 2006 or 2007, there's been different efforts to end it, and the latest effort is based on an election/power sharing arrangement. And so the top two Palestinian factions, Fatah and Hamas, have reached kind of an agreement that would allow for elections to happen on May 22nd for the Legislative Council. After the elections happen, there hopefully will be a unified government established, a coalition government. There's a lot of discussion about a Fatah-Hamas coalition government, so that it would ease the idea of unifying the laws and unifying the police forces and returning to a single entity. And if that happens, it would partially end the Hamas singular rule. If Hamas is in part of the government, whether directly or with proxy people supporting it, it will not end Hamas's power. Also, there's a question of the weapons of Hamas But again, I think we will stop here and then we can go back to it if you want. Next.
Thank you. How do Palestinians, in your opinion, feel about the ICC and its intention to investigate possible war crimes committed by the Israeli occupation forces or by Hamas?
Well, they welcome it. Everybody welcomed it. It's one of the. You have to understand something it's kind of complicated. To reach freedom, there are two ways. There are violent ways and there's non-violent ways. And for many years, Palestinians have tried the violent ways and it has not worked very well. And Mahmoud Abbas, the current president, has been a very stubborn, non-violent person. He's always believed and talked about the need for a negotiated settlement. Now, to negotiate, you need to have power, and the balance of power is not in our favor. So you need to find ways to put pressure on your opponent. And the International Criminal Court is one of those ways that Palestinians can have a bit more power in the negotiations if they ever reach that point. So yes, I think there's been overwhelming welcoming of the ICC, and it has to a certain degree vindicated Mahmoud Abbas, because many people have been accusing him of not doing anything, and the criminal court only happened because the Palestinians went to the UN, which many people said, why are you wasting your time with the UN? But by going to the UN, by being recognized as a state by 140 countries, the Palestinians were able to go to the to accept the Roma status, and then go to the ICC, become a member of the International Criminal Court, and then complained against Israel, and the ICC is now investigating. So, long story short, the ICC has been seen as a victory for those who believe in nonviolence, I think, and those who believe in negotiated settlement.
What's your opinion about the recent Beit Salem report on Israel being an apartheid state?
It's great. It's a bit late, but it's great. I think it's finally here that a relatively mainstream Israeli human rights organization is making this accusation and removing the attempts to hide behind false claims. So yes, it's a great thing, and I think it will help Palestinians prove that apartheid takes place and that this is a war crime.
Thank you. In your opinion, what has been the impact of the move of the U.S. Embassy move to Jerusalem?
I will not be very popular by saying this, but I don't think it made a difference. I think Palestinians make a big deal about the idea of capitals. Capitals mean nothing. Don't give us a capital in East Jerusalem, but end the occupation of East Jerusalem, I'm very happy. You can have, the capital can be in Jenin or Gaza for all I'm concerned. I don't care about the capital, the idea of a capital. And therefore the embassy issue is only important because of the symbolicness. By the way, the embassy is still in Tel Aviv. There's only a sign. There is really no U.S. embassy in Jerusalem. There's only a sign that says U.S. embassy. There's like 500 employees or 1,000 employees of the U.S. embassy in Tel Aviv. And they converted the house of the U.S. consul in Jerusalem to have the sign saying U.S. embassy. But it really has not changed much on the ground, as far as I know.
What do you think of what do you think Israel wants to do with 50% of the population under their control? 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, 2 million Palestinians in Israel. So now we have 7 million Israeli Jews and 7 million Palestinians.
It's the best question. I don't know. Ask the Israelis. They don't know what to do with us. As I said, we're stuck in their throat. They can't spit us out. They cannot swallow us. And as long as we're on the ground, not leaving our country, it's a problem. And as long as the world insists on people having the Woodrow Wilson right of self-determination, there has to be a breakthrough somewhere. And so, yeah, this is the most important issue.
Do you have an idea of what is the outline of the different strategies that are being discussed inside Israel, how to deal with 50% of the non-Jewish population that lives in the Holy Land?
You know, it's a good question, and it's one of the black holes in Israeli politics. Israel has some of the best thinkers and think tanks and so on, but they have not come up with any strategic idea of what to do with the West Bank and Gaza. What they would like is the permanent continuation of the status quo. Anything other than the status quo is not to Israel's favor. Ending the occupation, emerging, annexing, any possible idea that exists will not be in Israel's favor. The only thing that is in Israel's favor is the continuation of the status quo. So Mahmoud Abbas, Mohammed Dahlan, Marwan Barghouti, Mubarak Awad, whoever can change the status quo will be the hero. Our biggest problem is the continuation of the status quo ad nauseum. That's what we need to change.
If Israel and the USA do not want the ICC to come to Israel to investigate war crimes or alleged war crimes, what can the ICC or the UN do?
Oh, the ICC can convict an absentia if they try to investigate and the Israelis don't allow them physically. They will investigate in nearby countries or back in The Hague, and they would take evidentiary information from UN agencies, and they can convict. They don't come. That doesn't mean that they can get away with war crimes. The question is not whether individual Israelis will be accused and convicted of war crimes. The war crimes have to be individual. You don't put a country does not commit a war crime. Individuals commit war crimes. So soldiers, officers, politicians who order them can be convicted for war crimes and tried and imprisoned if they can be caught. The question is, the second more important question is, how do you enforce? Once you begin the investigation, once you realize that there has been war crimes, once you decide to begin a trial, once you reach a conclusion of criminality, what do? So you put out an order that, wanted Benjamin Netanyahu or Benny Gantz or whoever is the military officer in charge of the war crimes. But, they will only be enforceable once these individuals cross into the borders of countries that are members of the ICC.
Looking back at the Palestinians' attempt to put an end to the apartheid wall through international courts, what advice should we give to the ICC if they were listening to us?
I think the ICC needs to move quicker. I think they spent way too much time in bureaucratic nitpicking on issues. Now that the issue of the jurisdiction has been settled, I think they need to move much faster. Because we saw the war decision was done more than 10 years ago, nothing happened. So they need to move faster, and they need to have teeth. They need, whatever decisions they make, must have the power of enforcement. And as I said, the enforcement is as powerful as the countries that are members of the ICC. And here comes the BDS, the S part of the BDS. The boycott is, anybody can do a boycott. Divestment, business people can divest from Israel. But the sanctions is the power of countries. So while individuals can boycott, while business investors can divest, countries can sanction. And once we get to sanctions, that starts making occupation costly to Israel.
Is the ICC investigation investigating the subject of administrative detention of Palestinian children?
I don't believe this is on the current docket. I think right now there are two war crimes that are being investigated. The continuous settlement issue and the war on Gaza in 2014. Now, we can add things in the future, but I think these are two worthy, very clear issues. Clearly, the administrative detention is a violation of the Geneva Conventions. Geneva Convention says you're not, that's collective punishment. You cannot, there's actually two punishments. One is the actual holding people without trial and charge. The second is putting them in prison inside Israel. No Palestinian from the occupied territories should be imprisoned in the state of Israel. That's against the Geneva Convention.
Do you think the increasing media exposure of the apartheid and oppression is making any difference so far? The power of the media?
Yes and no. I think no, in the sense that it hasn't changed. I'll give you an example. In Europe, the European Union and individual European countries have voted in their parliaments to recognize the state of Palestine. Until this day, the state of Palestine has not been recognized by the same countries whose majority of the members said they should recognize. So the media has done enough to change attitudes of the individual population, but that has not been translated into political power. We need much more of that. Now, why? Yes, because I think, what we've seen in the last, especially in the last 4 years, especially in America, there has been a sea change among young Jewish Americans, progressives, blacks, who are all joining hands with the Palestinian movement, Palestinian rights. So almost all the Blacks Lives Matter demonstrations, you saw Palestinian flags. You saw when AOC, the progressive member of Congress, was invited to a particular Israeli event, she was under pressure and she disinvited, or she didn't go to that event. We saw in the presidential elections, for example, no candidate attended the AIPAC annual meeting, which is the very most unusual event that every year they used to kind of, trip over each other to go to that meeting. So I think there has been a change, especially among American Jewish young people and among progressives. We need to do more. There's some really good people that are being appointed in the Biden administration. The number one State Department official now is a guy called Hadi Amr. He's of Palestinian origin, an American who worked with the Obama administration and worked on the Biden elections. And he will be handling in the State Department the Palestinian-Israeli desk. So that's an important change. So we're having more and more people in important positions. Obviously, the other side has way too much more power and influence, but things are moving, and I think the media has made a difference.
Thank you. So here's a common question we hear many times in the media. Do Palestinians want a boycott against a factory which is employing Palestinians?
I mean, this question was asked also to South Africans who were told, why do you want us to boycott the apartheid regime? It's giving jobs to people. Look, liberation movements require sacrifice. And if that's the price to have freedom, I think the majority of Palestinians have shown that they are willing to pay that price. Of course, we don't want anybody to lose their jobs, but we don't want to lose our land and our freedom. So the fight for freedom requires sacrifice. And I think this is one of them. I don't think you can bribe Palestinians with a job so that the occupation could stay on forever.
A question, are you aware that increasingly campaigners are talking about ending Israel's colonialism and settler colonialism policies, rather than just referring to ending the occupation, which doesn't reflect Israel's policy of taking as much land with a few Palestinians as possible in all of historic Palestine. Do you find this encouraging to you?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think there is a one size fits all in the solidarity movement and the liberation struggle. People approach this issue from different angles, different ideologies, different lexicons. You know, sure, we should all agree on certain terms. We don't call it Judea and Samaria, we call it occupied territory. We don't call it administered or disputed territory. But you know, I'm happy with using the term colonialism because it is a colonial settlement. It's not just settlements. And I applaud everyone who helps the Palestinians. I said that from the beginning of my talk, and I will end if I have to with it. But I really appreciate the support, you guys, all of you, everything you've done, every letter you wrote, every email you wrote, every comment you made on a site, every vote you voted for, every dollar you contributed to people who support Palestinians is well appreciated. And I know sometimes it seems like we're all shouting in the desert, but it is being heard, and people do appreciate your efforts. And I want to thank all of you for all that you've done. And we need to do this together. We need to continue doing things together. We hope that there will be elections and there will be unity among Palestinians to make your efforts and our efforts together easier so that there will be more solidarity. But regardless of what happens, I think you are on the right side of history. You're supporting a just cause. And as Amos said, we want justice to flow. Let justice flow and let the rights of people, all the people, be you know, accomplished. That's a moral goal that you can be proud of.
Thank you, Daoud, and I want to thank you all for the great questions, and thank you, Daoud, for your great responses. Unfortunately, we do not have time to answer every question today, but there will be a chat to ask questions in the informal chat after the session. I hope Daoud would be able to join us. I'd briefly like to point
if you sorry to interrupt you. Follow me on Twitter. I'm Daoud Kuttab, DaoudKuttab. Almost everything I write is on Twitter. If you read my stuff, I would appreciate it.
Read it and share it too. I would also.
Yeah, sure, if you like it.
You don't have to like it. It's good for the cause. I would also briefly like to point you to our Kumi entry and action for the week. Links are going to be shared and have been shared in the chat. So we're holding a campaign. The point of the Kumi is to translate the topics of the week into action. And everyone deserves the right and benefits that come with being a citizen of a state: equal protection under the law, the right to leave and return to the state, the right to travel freely within the state. Many of us look upon our passports with pride, confident that any document can protect us, that it allows us to travel much of the world. We Palestinians, however, find ourselves denied citizenship or a passport, or if we have one, discriminated against based on its content. This week, let's raise awareness for the injustice by sharing a social media post with a flag of your country, the flag of Israel and the flag of Palestine. You can find a template on the website, kuminow.com. Include a message such as, "We are all citizens of the world and we all deserve equal rights as citizens of our countries. Let Israel know that they must stop citizenship discrimination against Palestinians in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza." Post your image on as many social media sites as possible. Consider printing out a stack of them and posting them in the real world, if you have been vaccinated and if it's within the health ministry recommendations. Include a link to our page Kumi Now website, along with the hashtags citizenship, Kumi Now, and Kumi7. So I'd like to give also Daoud an opportunity to comment on what he thinks of this Kumi action.
I know of Sabir, but I didn't know of Kumi. But it sounds like you have a very good idea, because I think what you're doing, from what I heard just now, is that you're both keeping people abreast with the news and giving them specific action directives, ideas of what to do. Because always when we talk to solidarity groups, they say, what can we do for Palestine? So I think you're addressing a thirst, a need by many people of wanting to do something. And so, yeah, I applaud you. It's a great idea.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us today. A link to this session will be available on the Kumi Now website and on YouTube and Facebook. And it will be also shared in our next newsletter. I have to salute and congratulate the people who are working, specifically Ryan, on the newsletter. It's one of the most, I keep receiving wonderful feedback on it. It's very informative and wonderful. So thank you, Ryan. We would also appreciate it if you start also encourage people to read it, or just to know that it is available and out there. Next week, we will be revisiting the twin issues of Israeli settlements and settler violence against Palestinians. Next week is also the anniversary, or the next week Palestinians will be commemorating the Al-Haram al-Ibrahimi massacre. So we have a special session that will be focusing on Hebron and settlements inside Hebron, and what people are doing and the communities and the organizations are doing to challenge the injustice and the human rights violation in Hebron. Once again, I would like to thank you all and invite people who are able to continue, if you'd like to be with us in an informal gathering where we will try to answer the remaining few questions with Daoud and open it up for friendly chat. Thank you very much.